Ramon, everybody sometimes thinks that South Africa is all doom and gloom and we should all immigrate at the earliest opportunity. And as you're currently in Portugal on business, now might be a really good time to have a look at an article that Franz Cornea has pushed out into the Biz News. And it's basically about why he's positive on the South African economy and he's positive for the future of South Africa. So this maybe feeds into something that we've talked about before on why you and I aren't looking to immigrate. So I'm going to just show the article quickly so that we can go through it and we'll have a bit of a talk about it. So the article, as it appeared in Biz News, is entitled "Dr. Franz Cronje, South Africa on the brink of post-ANC rejuvenation." I was optimistic a year ago. I'm very optimistic now, and he goes on to explain why. So this is basically done in the format of a question and answer. The first thing is I ask Dr. Cronje why he left the IRR, and then it basically goes on to say why have his views changed and what's the potential for a brighter horizon in South Africa. What did you take from this?
So just quickly, Franz Grenier, I know him. He was a guest on my previous show. He was a guest on this show as well about 2 years ago. And if you have followed Franz Grenier as a author and as a writer for the past 10 to 15 years, everything that we have seen in South Africa should not be a surprise. He called it way before anyone else. And he also called the fact that 2024 is probably the end of the ANC. So when France speaks, we listen as Morning Shot because we actually derive quite a lot of our analysis through his own analysis. So in essence, what France says is he's really optimistic about South Africa. He's always was seen as sort of like the party pooper, like when people say, "Oh, there's a Ramaphoria and a new dawn and all this and all that." He says, "None of that matters. It's not gonna. It's only gonna get worse. We're gonna drag along the bottom for quite a while." And he has been right for the most part. And he also famously coined the enclave scenario for South Africa, where it breaks up and we become enclaves. And I still think he thinks that's the reality for South Africa, and me too, by the way. So, once again, if the state disintegrates, enclaves become a real thing, and that is my prediction for South Africa. But just because the state is integrated doesn't mean that that is necessarily a bad thing. And what France is saying is that the ANC will probably lose 2024. They're currently polling in South Africa at 46%.
Mm.
If you take away Cyril, you minus 10% from that. So they're
Yeah, so
polling
it's
at
30%.
36%
Mm.
without Cyril Ramaphosa. And that is massively down. They won 70% in 2004. This has been a precipitous fall for the ANC. And once the ANC falls, the opportunities arise for something much better than it. And that's what he talks about when he talks about the rejuvenation of South Africa.
Mm. So then he does actually talk about that a little bit, and he says the ANC are obviously hard at work to discredit the idea of coalitions in the minds of voters, and they're hard at work at trying to make the opposition parties seem to be unviable in the bid to kind of like boost up their own kind of image. And I suppose that kind of
Yeah.
feeds into the news now that today, at the time of recording in Nelson Mandela Bay, they've managed to get a coalition agreement, and they will now be taking the Bay off the ANC's hands, and it will go into a DA-led coalition. But we've also seen in recent days another potential coalition in KZN fall apart because of some fighting, or should we say infighting, basically between Action SA and the DA. And obviously, the ANC are all over that, basically kind of using that as an example of why coalitions are unworkable. What's your view on that?
So I think the Bay they will certainly get. And what's important, I think it's very important. The coalition does not need to be rosy and filled with unicorns and everyone gets along and sings kumbaya. Coalitions are necessarily extremely difficult. The best person to
Mm,
deal with this is Helen Ziller. She had an 8 or 7 party coalition in the city of Cape Town back in 2006, and she held it together for 4 years. So
mm,
that woman knows what she's doing. So this tit and tat between Action SA and KZN, and there was a few issues with the Nelson Mandela Bay coalition as well before they
mm,
actually signed as time of recording. the most important thing is as long as the DA has a coalition agreement in place where it actually lays out what is expected from all parties, that's how you build a real coalition. And we're seeing it in real time. That
Mm,
coalition that is building Nelson Mandela Bay or their place in KwaZulu-Natal, that is currently running Joburg, Tshwane, and other areas of this country, that coalition could run South Africa in
mm,
2024. And I have seen nothing to dissuade me from the notion that that isn't a possibility. The foundation is being set right now, and everyone in that coalition knows they have a real shot at 2024. And with that, of course, comes some form of rejuvenation, not because the coalition partners agree on everything, but they would agree on like Eskom's a huge issue, let's privatize it, as an
mm.
example. Or they would really sort out like SAPs are really a problem, let's fix it.
Yeah,
They
let's
will
increase the
disagree about
funding.
finance or policy or
Mm,
things like that, but they will at least agree on like the fundamentals of what makes a country work.
mm, mm. So I think one of the things that Franz Cunha does mention is he does say what we're seeing is the
Sorry, Brian,
disintegration.
you're completely quiet.
Yeah, I was listening to you talk. So I said one of
Nope.
sorry about that, guys. Seems to have frozen there for a second. We've unfrozen it. Anyway, France does go on to basically say that we're obviously seeing the disintegration of the ANC, and I think a couple of days ago we covered some of the ANC's policy dilemmas, things that most normal people would describe as being in the realms of kind of like really tyrannical Chinese style stuff. And one of the things that we mentioned in our video on that, if you haven't already watched it, please do go give it a watch. One of the things that we mentioned was the ANC sees the formation of coalition governments as being a direct threat to the ANC. They're saying that these parties are basically acting like mafias, and that in acting like mafias, they're clubbing together in order for no other reason than to push the ANC out of governance, which actually is to a degree true. But I mean, they're seeing it as being thuggish behavior as opposed to like the only way for us to actually make sure the country actually works. So one of their solutions to protecting themselves against this was obviously to create a one-party state, which we covered in depth during that video. And we said, well, actually, the ANC's always kind of wanted this, and it's their idea to rule the country until Jesus comes back. Um, what's your view?
We have noticed quite a few people saying, without the ANC, South Africa dies, right? Banyaza
Mm,
Lesufi came out and says, if the ANC is not in charge, it'll be chaos. There was another ANC member, I can't remember who said basically the same thing. But what you are seeing is that the ANC knows that they're dead, right?
mm,
You can see it in their faces, you can see it the way they conduct themselves. And also, the much vaunted energy plan by Cyril Ramaphosa to prevent load shedding. I mean, if you actually read France's answer to that, Ramaphosa said this is, you know, to keep load shedding at lower levels. It's not a
mm,
plan to save South Africa or save the energy grid. It's just to have a bit more energy into the grid to prevent load shedding. But we need more megawatts to grow the economy. Like we are
mm,
capped by Eskom, irrespective of how good Cyril's plan is.
mm.
So even their plans are not saving South Africa, even if they manage to implement them, which I have my doubts about.
Well, they're saying
So
two
France
two
says something that
years
I
to
agree.
to get it there. They actually say 2 years to get their
Exactly.
plan in place.
And that plan is, sorry to say, a bullshit plan. Like
Mm,
it adds a few extra megawatts and nothing else. We need 20, 30,000 megawatts extra to the grid to have more than 2% growth. It's as simple as
mm,
that. But the ANC are completely incapable of giving us that. So as France says, we just need the Russians to build nuclear reactors all over the place. And that's the real solution, which I agree with.
mm. And you did a video on that, actually explaining why Russia's mini nuclear reactors, even if we put them out in ships out in the sea, so that even if they exploded, they wouldn't damage the internal lands, while they could be a quick fix for South Africa. So I think it's an interesting kind of take. I mean, I think it's kind of reaffirming the position that we've taken. We've also said the same kind of thing, and we've both said that part of the reason that we feel positive about South Africa is because of the disintegration of South Africa. We're seeing right around the world. I mean, we're not going to cover it. I mean, these are topics I don't really want to talk about too much, but the WEF recently has just promoted this idea that anybody driving a car is wasteful. You got the WHO now saying that they're wanting people to do things like not have intercourse because of monkeypox, and they don't want to have that. And like, there's so many kind of like crazy ideas going on in the ideas of the globalists, and
Yeah.
merely by mentioning this, you get called a crazy conspiracy theorist, and you get a load of hate. But the reality is, no matter how extreme those plans get, implementing them in a place like South Africa, where we can't even keep the power on, becomes more and more difficult. So we see South Africa as kind of like being a hopeful place because of the ability of it to disintegrate. Stateless societies are basically, we consider to be the future. It's like we also consider futures not to be a place where you or cities not to be a place where you're going to want to live your future. We think the countryside is probably where you're going to want to be, back to farming, those kind of communities. And certainly when the government starts adopting kind of thing, foreign WF policies like don't use fertilizer, and we have food shortages, it's going to be very difficult to kind of survive in a city type environment. If you look at China, where they're having, the majority of their lockdowns, and they're having the majority of their like tyrannical rule, it's in places like Shanghai. It's a city. They're not having them out in the fields of nowhere because there's nothing there. So for us, we consider this to be a positive step. The idea of, I know there's lots of people that look at places like Oranje and go, oh, look, it's just, more of the racist. But what Oranje shows you is that a community, regardless, forget that it's Afrikaans, forget that it's white, what Oranje shows you is that a community can look after its own needs and still thrive. And that's what Oranje should show you. It shouldn't, yeah, okay, you can make the argument about racism and, apartheid and whatever else you want. But what Oranje really stands for is an enclave society that's been able to provide for its own needs and still thrive. And that's really, what we should be looking to the future of South Africa as being. Some people might see that as being really like a bad thing because it's like no Starbucks. But it's a mindset issue. It's a mindset issue.
Complete mindset issue. I mean, if you are able to earn international currencies while building a community in some far-flung area of South Africa, you're going to live a better life than 99% of the world. Even in your big cities in the first world, it's going to be much cheaper, it's going to be much safer, you're going to have a much more connection to the people around you. And you're going to be much more free than anywhere else in the world. Like, I don't see why, if you have that mindset, I don't see why you would want to move anywhere else.
Neither do I. Well, that being said, thanks, Shimon. It was an interesting article and, a serious one, but one that was interesting to go through. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Until next time.
and your pleasure. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.